Virtue. It's one of those words that feels dusty. It feels like it belongs in a museum case.
Right next to, like, chivalry or something.
Exactly. It makes me think of, I don't know, a stern Victorian school teacher telling me to sit up straight. We usually just think of it as being good.
It's a description of behavior, a quality. He is a virtuous person.
Right, the person comes first. And virtue is just this coat they decide to put on.
Yeah.
But, and this is why I just could not put down the source material for this week, what if we've been looking at it completely backward?
What if it's not the adjective?
What if it's the noun, the actual thing? What if virtue isn't an action we perform, but a living entity?
And that's the moment the floor just drops out from under you. It's a huge paradigm shift.
A huge one. And we're not just talking about any entity. The thesis we're looking at today makes the claim that virtue is actually the most accurate philosophical and, well, even scientific name for God.
Which is a massive claim. I mean, it completely reorients the map. If virtue is God, then being good isn't about following a social rule book.
No.
It's about aligning your entire being, your biology, your psychology, with the fundamental reality of the universe itself.
So today, we're going to try and bridge a gap that, frankly, I didn't think could be bridged. We're connecting ancient Greek philosophy, specifically Socrates.
The godfather of asking all the annoying questions.
Him, yes. We're connecting him with Islamic theology. We're going to look at how reason and revelation collide and why, according to our source, you actually need both of them to see clearly.
We're diving into a philosophical thesis called Virtue is God by Abdul Ghaffar Junba, and we're also pulling from extracts on the essence of Islam. And I have to say, the author's method it's really rigorous. He calls it decompose and distill.
Decompose and distill. It sounds like a chemistry experiment.
It is, in a way. But for ideas, you take a big, messy concept like the soul or God, and you break it down, you decompose it to its absolute base elements to see what's real and what's just. Well, what's just noise?
And the first thing he decomposes is history itself. He makes this argument that for centuries, Muslim thinkers, and really religious thinkers in general, have been trying to understand their own scriptures.
While wearing Greek glasses.
Exactly. They're reading the Quran, for instance, but they're reading it through the lens of Plato and Aristotle.
And that creates a distortion, right? Because you have the revelation saying one thing, that God is living, that God speaks. And then you have the philosophers saying, well, God is a static first cause. He's pure intellect. He doesn't change.
So for hundreds of years, you have theologians trying to jam this square peg of a living, speaking God into the round hole of Greek rationalism.
It just feels backwards when you put it like that. I mean, if you believe you have the literal word of God, why on earth would you filter it through someone who lived hundreds of years before the text was even revealed?
That is the core critique in the source material. The argument is that true philosophy shouldn't be imposed on the Quran. It has to be dug out of it. We need to stop focusing on the ought to be.
What our limited human logic says God should be like.
Right. And instead, we need to look at the is, what God, in his own words, actually says he is.
The ought versus the is. We're definitely going to circle back to that because that distinction explains so much about why modern philosophy can feel so dry compared to actual religious experience.
It does. But to get there, we have to start where the source starts, with the man himself. Socrates.
Socrates is the starting line.
And the source spends a lot of time on this, redefining what Socrates actually meant by that famous maxim we've all heard. Virtue is knowledge.
Right. And, you take Philosophy 101, and the professor explains it as an ethical statement. They'll say it means if you truly know what is right, you will automatically do what is right.
The idea that all vice is just a form of ignorance. If you knew better, you'd do better.
Which, let's be honest, is just demonstrably false.
Oh, completely. I mean, anyone who has ever stared at an entire pizza at 2 in the morning knows this isn't true. I possessed the absolute knowledge that eating it was a terrible idea.
You knew the heartburn was coming.
I knew it was coming. I knew the calories were a disaster. I had all the knowledge, and I still ate the entire pizza.
We've all been there. And that's the disconnect, right? That's where the standard interpretation of Socrates just falls apart. If virtue is knowledge just meant knowing the rules, then the smartest people would always be the best people.
And history shows us very clearly that extremely intelligent people can be absolute monsters.
So Janba, the author, proposes something different. He says Socrates wasn't talking about virtuous action. He wasn't giving self-help advice on how to be nice. He was talking about objective virtue.
Okay, this is where it gets a little grammatical, but it's so important. The logic of action.
Yes, stick with us here because the payoff is huge. The author breaks down the simple logic of an action. Every action, any action at all, requires an object. You just cannot have an action without something to act upon.
So give me the example from the text.
Okay, if I say I am drinking, that's the action. But I can't perform the action of drinking unless there is a drink, a liquid. The object has to exist for the action to even be possible.
All right, they follow that. I can't drink nothing. If I'm reading, there has to be a book or a screen. If I'm eating, there has to be food. The action implies the object.
The twins. They're inextricably linked. So the author pivots this logic to virtuous action. When we say someone is being good or just or truthful, those are actions. We are performing the act of being virtuous.
Okay.
And if every action must have an object, then the action of being virtuous must have an object as well. It requires objective virtue, a thing called virtue.
Hold on. I want to push back on this a little bit because this is where my modern skeptical brain kicks in.
Yeah.
I can imagine a unicorn. That's an action, imagining. But the object, the unicorn, doesn't actually exist in reality. It's just in my head.
That's the perfect objection.
So couldn't virtue just be a concept we invented? A useful fiction to keep society from collapsing? A unicorn we all agree to believe in?
And this is the crucial distinction the source makes. You do not have a fundamental biological soul-deep need for unicorns. You don't get sick and die from a lack of unicorns.
That's true.
But the human soul, across all cultures, across all of history, has a fundamental, undeniable drive for truth, for justice, for meaning, for goodness. The author argues this thirst is as real and as biological as our thirst for water.
So, let me see if I have this right. Just as the physical sensation of thirst in my body proves the objective existence of water out there in the world,
Yes.
the moral and spiritual sensation of striving for goodness proves the objective existence of a moral source, a thing called virtue.
That is precisely the argument. If the thirst is universal, and it is, every human culture has a concept of good, then the object that quenches that thirst must also be universal and real. We perform virtuous acts because we feel a kind of magnetic pull toward the source of all virtue.
So when Socrates said virtue is knowledge, he wasn't saying knowing the rules makes you good.
No, he was making a theological statement. He was saying the supreme, ultimate, universal truth, which is God, is the only true knowledge. He was identifying the object of our highest striving.
Okay, you used a very specific phrase there from the text. Supreme, ultimate, universal truth. The source breaks that down word by word, and they aren't just buzzwords. They're like coordinates for locating this reality.
They're very precise definitions. Let's start with supreme. It means above all creation. It's the first cause that is itself causeless. Everything else in the universe is a domino that was pushed over by another domino. Virtue is the finger that pushed the very first one.
Uncaused. Okay. Then ultimate.
That's the final destination, the end of the line. It's the root where all lines of inquiry, all of science and philosophy eventually terminate. Think about physics. You ask, what is this table made of?
Molecules.
What are molecules made of? Atoms. What are atoms made of? Protons, neutrons, electrons. What are they made of? Quarks. And you keep asking, what is it made of? And eventually, you hit a wall, a point where you can't reduce it any further. That final, irreducible reality. That's the ultimate.
And universal.
Omnipresent. It encompasses everything, but it isn't limited to any one particular thing. You know, the source uses the analogy of a canvas. The universe is the painting, with all its specific stars and people and tables, but the universal truth is the canvas that the entire painting exists upon.
And finally, truth. This is a big one.
Yeah.
Because I feel like in our modern world, we use truth to just mean a fact.
Yeah.
Like, it is true that it's Tuesday, but this feels much, much deeper.
So much deeper. In this philosophical framework, truth means the real. It is that which exists independently by its own power permanently. And this leads to what was, for me, one of the most jarring parts of the whole text.
Just
The classification of everything else, everything we can see and touch and measure, our bodies, the planet, the stars, as phenomena.
phenomena, which basically means an illusion. Is that what it's saying?
Not quite illusion, more like
Okay.
transient, temporary, dependent. The source draws this sharp contrast between the real, which is God or virtue, and phenomena, which is the created universe.
Yeah.
And it uses a really powerful analogy to explain this, the H2O analogy.
I found this incredibly helpful because usually when we get into metaphysics, my eyes start to glaze over. But water, I get. but walk us through it.
Okay, so think about the different forms of H2O. You have ice. It's hard, it's cold, it's solid, you can hold it. Then you have water. It's liquid, it's fluid, it flows. Then you have steam. It's a gas, it's invisible, it's hot.
And clouds, and mist, and fog.
Exactly. To our five senses, an iceberg looks and feels nothing like a cloud. A block of ice seems like a completely different thing than a puff of steam. They have totally different properties.
They seem like different species of reality.
But what is the underlying reality behind all of them? It's all just hydrogen and oxygen, H2O. The form, the ice, the steam, that's temporary. It changes, it melts, it evaporates. But the essence, the H and the O, that's the constant reality. The ice is just a phenomenon of the H2O.
Okay, so now applying this to to everything. The universe is the ice.
The universe is the ice. The galaxies, the stars, the planets, the atoms, your body, my body. We are the ice, the steam, the clouds. We are transitory forms. We appear, we hold a certain shape for a little while, and then eventually we dissipate.
That's actually a slightly terrifying thought.
It creates a sense of vertigo, doesn't it? A real philosophical vertigo.
It does, because it implies that this person I think I am not the fundamental reality. I'm just a temporary shape, a pattern being held by a deeper reality that's flowing through me.
And that's exactly what the source argues. It even challenges the scientific law of conservation of matter. You know, we're taught in school that matter is neither created nor destroyed, it just changes form.
Right.
This text argues no. Matter is a phenomenon. It is mortal. It is created. It changes, and eventually it perishes. Entropy ensures that. The only thing that is truly immortal, that doesn't decay, is the creator, the virtue, the reality that manifests the phenomena.
And this is what distinguishes this view from something like pantheism, right? Because sometimes when people hear God is everywhere, they think pantheism. You know, the tree is God, the rock is God, I am God.
A very important distinction, yes. Pantheism would say the ice is the H2O. That if you add up all the parts of the universe, the sum total is God. This source is arguing for a very specific form of monotheism. God is the independent being that manifests the universe. He is not the ice. He is the reality that makes the ice possible.
So God isn't the sum of all things.
No. He is separate from them, yet they cannot exist without him.
The text uses another metaphor here. The mirage.
A mirage.
The entire material world is a mirage. It looks like it can quench your thirst, but it can't. The thirsty traveler, and that's the human soul, is desperately seeking water. But if you chase the mirage, if you chase money or fame or physical pleasure as your ultimate goal, you end up with a mouthful of sand.
Because they aren't the real.
They're just phenomena. You have to seek the reality behind the mirage, the source of the light that's creating the illusion. Okay, so if the world is a mirage, and God is the hidden reality behind it, how do we actually find him? I mean, if he's not the tree and he's not the ice, where is he? How do we even begin to look?
This is where the source provides a kind of conceptual framework. It's called the four faces of virtue.
It's like a way for our finite minds to get a handle on the infinite.
Precisely. You can't put the entire ocean in a cup, but you can stand on the shore and look at it from four different directions. And the four faces are the first, the last, the manifest, and the latent.
Let's break these down because they seem to work in pairs, the first and the last.
Right. So the first isn't just about being, first in line. It's a deep concept. It connects to the idea of action or motion. God is the initiator, the prime mover. Every single motion in the universe, from a galaxy spinning to a neuron firing in your brain, ultimately traces its causal chain back to his original impulse.
And the last is the flip side of that.
It's the object. He's the destination, the ultimate purpose or goal of all that motion.
So, to use a simple analogy, he's the one who pushes the swing, and he's also the one who's waiting to catch it at the very end of its arc.
That's a great way to put it. And this leads to a really fascinating redefinition of time. Usually we think of time as, a clock ticking on the wall, a neutral, empty container that we all just live inside of.
Newton's absolute time, tick-tock, tick-tock. Even if the entire universe were empty, the clock would just keep on ticking independently.
The source completely rejects that. It argues for something it calls virtuous time. Time is not a container God exists in. Time is an aspect of the divine. It's the very measurement of the universe's journey from the first to the last.
Okay, that sounds a little abstract. Can you give me an analogy for that one? Time is an aspect of God.
Think of a movie projector. The film reel, with all its individual frames, is the universe of phenomena. But the light that shines through the film and the motor that turns the reels, that's the divine agency. Time is the motion of the movie being played. It's not separate from the projector, it's the projector in action. Time is a verb, not a noun.
That helps.
Yeah.
That helps a lot. So time is the action of God playing out.
And if time is the action of God, then space is the expanse of God. And this connects directly to the other two faces, the manifest and the latent.
The manifest seems straightforward enough. It means obvious, visible. The source says God is manifest in the order and design of the universe.
Yes. When a physicist discovers a beautiful mathematical law that governs the cosmos, or a biologist studies the incredible complexity of the human eye, or you just look at the golden ratio in a seashell, you are seeing the manifest face of virtue. You're seeing the artist's brushstrokes.
But then we hit the fourth face, the latent, the hidden. And this, I think, is where most people, including myself, really struggle. If God is real and so powerful, why is he hidden? Why the silence? Why doesn't he just show up in the sky and say, hello, here I am, now everyone can believe?
This is the ancient struggle, isn't it? The problem of divine hiddenness. The source argues that latent is actually a necessary attribute. It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Think about gravity again. Gravity is manifest in its result, right? The apple falls from the tree, the planets orbit the sun, we see its effects everywhere. But can you see gravity itself? Can you hold a bucket of gravity?
No, of course not. It's invisible.
It's latent, but it's holding the entire universe together. The source argues that if God were fully manifest, if we saw his reality directly with our physical eyes, it would annihilate our free will. It would be like trying to choose whether or not to believe in the sun while you're standing on its surface.
You wouldn't be able to choose to acknowledge the heat. You'd just be vaporized by it.
Exactly. The latency, the hiddenness, is what creates the space for us to exist as independent beings and to choose to seek him. The hiding is an act of mercy.
So the hiddenness is for our protection and for our development, which brings us right to the problem of reason. Because God is latent, we can't just look out the window and see him waving. We have to use our minds. But the source argues that reason has a very hard ceiling.
A very clear limit, and it outlines these three stages of knowledge to explain the journey. They are ilmul yakin, anul yakin, and hakol yakin.
They're a bit of a mouthful, but the concepts themselves are actually very intuitive.
They really are. They describe the journey from pure logic to direct experience. The first stage, the one we all start with, is ilmul yakin, knowledge by inference. The classic analogy is seeing smoke and inferring fire.
Right. I'm standing on a ridge, I look across the valley, and I see a plume of smoke rising from behind the next hill. I don't see any flames, I don't feel any heat, but my brain calculates. Smoke is an effect that comes from a cause, and that cause is fire. Therefore, there must be a fire.
And that, according to this text, is the absolute limit of reason, philosophy, and science. Science is excellent at studying the smoke of the universe, the evidence of the Big Bang, the fine-tuning of physical constants, the complexity of DNA. It can infer a cause. It can tell you that a fire exists.
But it can't tell you anything about the fire.
Nothing personal. It can't tell you if the fire is warm or cold, what color it is, or if it cares about you. It's an impersonal, inferred reality. It's the god of the philosophers.
So how do we get past that? How do we get over the hill?
To get over the hill, you have to move to the second stage, anul yakin, which means knowledge by sight. You have to actually walk over the crest of the hill and see the fire for yourself.
And the source is emphatic on this point.
Yeah.
This step is impossible for reason to take on its own. It requires revelation.
This is the absolute crux of the entire argument. You cannot think your way over the hill. You need a guide who has been there, or you need a light to see the path. The source uses the analogy of a blind man and the sun.
Right. A man born blind can construct all sorts of logical arguments proving that the sun doesn't exist. His entire experience is darkness, so from his limited data set, darkness is the only reality.
Exactly. His logic is perfectly sound based on his flawed perception, but it's wrong. And a million sighted people telling him about the sun won't convince him until his own eyes are opened. Reason, the source says, is the eye. But revelation-why is the sun itself.
So you can have perfect 20/20 vision, which is a perfect logical mind. But if you're locked in a pitch-black room, you're still effectively blind.
You can't see a thing. You need that external light of revelation to flood the room and illuminate what was already there.
And then there's the third and final stage, hakol yakin, knowledge by experience.
This is the most intense one. This is not just seeing the fire. This is walking into the fire. This is feeling the heat on your skin. This is letting the fire become a part of you. This is the state of the prophets and the mystics and the saints.
They don't just see the light.
They adopt the color of Allah, sibghatullah.
The coloring of Allah. What does that mean, practically?
It means they polish the mirror of their soul so perfectly that they begin to reflect the attributes of God. They become the manifest evidence of the latent God for the rest of humanity. They are the living proof that the fire is real.
Okay, this brings us to that really deep part of the discussion, the decompose and distill section, about the human being itself. Because if we are meant to enter this fire, we must be built for it. But are we? The source does a really interesting deep dive on the nature of the soul.
And right away, it completely rejects the common ghost in the machine idea.
Yeah, the idea that the soul is just a passenger, like a little glowing bird that flies into a baby when it's born and then flies out again when the body dies.
Separate from the body, just along for the ride. The source, drawing from the essence of Islam, argues that the soul is latent in the seed. It isn't some foreign object that gets inserted into us. It's an evolutionary development that grows with the body.
Latent in the seed. That reminds me of another analogy from the text, the fire and the flint.
Yes, it's the same principle. If you pick up a piece of flintstone, is there fire inside it? Can you see it or feel it? No.
Yeah.
But if you strike it against steel in just the right way, a spark of fire emerges. The potential for fire was always there, hidden within the molecular structure of the stone.
So the soul is like that spark. It emerges from the physical, biological structure of the body when it reaches a certain level of complexity.
Biology gives birth to theology, in a way. The source outlines a kind of spiritual evolution. You start with the growthless soul of minerals and rocks. They exist, but they don't grow or reproduce. Then you get the botanical soul of plants. They grow, they seek light, they reproduce.
Then you move up to the irrational soul, animals.
Right. They have movement, desire, instinct, a rudimentary consciousness.
And finally, us, the rational soul. But this is where it gets really interesting, because the source introduces these three specific Quranic terms to describe the internal states of the human soul. This is the real decomposition of our inner life.
This is the map of our internal battlefield. First, at the very bottom, you have the nafsi amara. This translates roughly to the uncontrollable soul, or sometimes the soul that incites to evil. This is our base animal nature. It's the irrational soul that we've carried over in our evolution.
So this is the part of me that wants to eat the whole pizza. It's the part that wants to punch the guy who cut me off in traffic. It's the part that just wants to sleep in and avoid responsibility. It's basically Freud's eye.
It is. It's pure, unadulterated instinct. I want, so I take. Now, in an animal, this isn't evil. It's just survival. A lion isn't evil for killing and eating a zebra. It's just being a lion. But in a human being who has the capacity for reason and moral choice, allowing the nafsi amara to be the one driving the bus is the definition of vice. It's a disaster.
Okay, so that's the starting point. Then what's the second state?
The second state is the nafsi lawama. This is the self-accusing soul. This is your conscience. This is the police officer that lives inside your head. It's the state of internal conflict. Your amara drives you to do something selfish, and then your lawama wakes up afterwards and says, hey, wait a minute, that was wrong. You shouldn't have done that. You feel guilty now.
So this is where most of us live our lives, right? In the middle of this constant war between our base desires and our conscience.
I think most decent people live their entire lives in this state. It's a state of constant tension. You fall down, you feel regret, you get back up, you try again. It's the struggle of filtering our animal impulses through the lens of reason and morality.
And the goal, the final stage, is to end that war.
The goal is to reach the third state, nafsi mutmaina, the soul at rest, the soul that is in a state of perfect peace. This is when the war is over. The animal nature, the amara, has been completely and willingly tamed and surrendered to virtue. You no longer even want to do the wrong thing. Doing good becomes as natural and effortless as breathing.
That sounds completely impossible. It sounds like a superhero state of being.
It does. It sounds like something beyond human. But the source argues that achieving this state is the entire purpose of what it calls the divine covenant.
The covenant. This goes back to a verse in the Quran about the trust, right?
Yes. The text says that God offered this trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, and they all refused it. They were terrified of it. But mankind accepted it.
Why would a mountain be afraid of a trust? That seems like a strange image.
Because the trust is free will. It's the awesome, terrifying ability to choose against your own nature. A mountain must be a mountain. A river must flow downhill. They have no choice in the matter. They cannot sin, but by the same token, they cannot achieve true virtue. They are neutral.
But we aren't.
We accepted the contract. We accepted the ability to choose, And that means we have the potential to sink lower than animals if we let our nafsi amara run wild, or to rise higher than the angels if we can manage to reach the state of nafsi mutmanina.
So we basically signed a contract that gave us the potential for infinite gain, but also the risk of infinite loss.
Precisely. And the source defines vice in this context as essentially a breach of that contract. It calls vice the mixing of disobedience into action.
Disobedience to what exactly?
Disobedience to the designed function of the tool. Think about your tongue. It was created with the faculty for communication. If you use it to speak the truth, you're using the tool as it was designed. The source would call that a compound virtuous action, a virtuous act performed with a virtuous tool. But if you use it to lie, you are taking a God-given faculty, the tongue, and using it to violate a God-given purpose, which is truth. You are mixing pollution into a clear stream.
That is a really helpful way to think about sin. It's not just breaking some arbitrary rule from a book. It's about misusing the equipment.
Yeah.
It's like using a delicate microscope to hammer a nail. You're violating its very nature.
Exactly. And because our nafsi amara, our animal self, loves to misuse the equipment for a quick, short-term pleasure, we need help. We are not going to figure this out on our own. We need the owner's manual.
Which brings us right back to Revelation and to that central conflict in the text. The philosophers versus the Quran. The ought versus the is.
This is the intellectual battlefield. Janba, the author, spends a lot of time critiquing the rationalist school of thought, the Mu'tazila, who tried to define God using only human logic. They created a God of ought.
What does a God of ought look like? What are his characteristics?
He looks like a perfect but cold mathematical equation. They argued, for instance, God is perfect. Change implies imperfection, because if you change, you either get better or worse, both of which are impossible for a perfect being. Therefore, God cannot change.
Okay, that's logical.
It's very logical, but follow the logic. If God cannot change, then God cannot react to human prayers. If God cannot change, he cannot feel emotions like anger or love. You follow this chain of oughts and you end up with a God who is a frozen, static, unchanging principle.
A block of ice, a philosophical statue.
It results in a dead God, a first cause, who wound up the clock of the universe at the beginning and then just walked away. The source argues you cannot fit the infinite into the pint pot of finite reason. You're trying to describe the entire ocean, and all you have is a coffee cup to measure it with. Your tool is inadequate for the job.
So what is the alternative? What is the is?
The is what the Quran presents, and the Quran doesn't present a philosophical principle. It presents a God who talks, a God who is Al-Hayy, the living, and Al-Qayyum, self-subsisting and all-sustaining.
The source is so emphatic about this point, the idea that God speaks.
It is the absolute dividing line. If God is just a philosophical concept, he is silent by definition. But if God is a living entity, if virtue is alive, then he must be capable of communication. The source makes the bold claim that a God who does not speak is, for all practical purposes, a non-existent God.
That is a very bold statement.
It is. But think about it. Imagine you're convinced that your best friend is in the next room. But he never speaks, he never makes a sound, he never answers when you call his name. How long can you maintain the belief that he's actually in there? For all practical purposes, the room is empty. The very essence of Islam, according to the source, is the conviction that the friend in the next room speaks.
But the crucial question is, does he still speak? Or did he speak once, 1,400 years ago, and then go silent? Because that's the other trap people fall into. The idea that he used to speak, but the line is dead now.
And the source directly attacks this idea of a closed door. It talks about the absolute necessity of the fresh sign. If God's attribute is that he is living, then he must continue to be living. You can't be living only in the past tense. That's just called being dead.
So the source argues for the continuation of revelation in some form.
It argues that the potential for divine communication is always open. It specifically mentions the concept of the promised Messiah and the ongoing experiences of saints and righteous people as proof that the line is not dead. The fresh sign is like fresh rain that proves the sky still contains water. Without it, religion just dries up and becomes a collection of historical tales. It becomes philosophy.
It validates the is. It proves the fire is still hot. It didn't go out centuries ago.
Yes. And receiving that sign is what moves a person from ilmul yaqeen. I infer from the smoke that God exists to anul yaqeen. I have now seen his fire working in my own life.
So let's try to bring this all together. We've gone from Greek philosophy to water cycles, to the evolution of the soul, to the need for revelation. What is the ultimate point? What's the takeaway for the listener who has followed us on this journey?
The goal is transformation. The goal is Sibgatula, coloring yourself with the color of God. The source asks the most fundamental question, why are we here? And it answers, to recognize and to worship the supreme truth.
But worship, in this context, isn't just about ritual prayer or chanting, is it?
Not at all. In this context, worship is alignment. It is the active, lifelong process of polishing the mirror of the soul. It's the journey of moving from the chaos of Nafsi Amara through the struggle of Nafsi Lawama to finally arrive at the peace of Nafsi Mutmainna. And when you reach that state,
The mirror is so clean that it perfectly reflects the attributes of virtue.
you become a little mirror of the infinite. You become a manifestation of the latent God in the world.
You make the hidden God visible through your actions.
Beautifully put. When you act with justice, you are showing a flicker of God's absolute justice. When you show compassion, you are showing a flicker of God's infinite mercy. You become the evidence.
And this leads to that final, really provocative thought experiment from the source, this stripping experiment. I have to admit, this one has been keeping me up at night since I read it.
It's a powerful way to test your own sense of reality.
So the source says, take any object in the world, like an apple, and in your mind, strip away all of its qualities. Take away its redness, take away its roundness, take away its sweetness, its weight, its texture. What's left of the apple?
Nothing. An absolute void. To our minds, the object is nothing but the sum of its qualities. If you remove all the attributes, the thing itself ceases to exist for us.
Now apply that to yourself. The whole point of this framework is that we are meant to be mirrors of divine attributes, of virtue, truth, kindness, justice, knowledge. So if I strip away those attributes from my life, if I choose to not be kind, if I am consistently not truthful, if I reject virtue, do I begin to cease to exist in a real spiritual sense?
That's the existential terror at the heart of it. If we are not reflecting the real, are we just the mirage? Are we just the ice that holds its shape for a moment before melting and leaving no trace behind?
It suggests that our very existence, or at least our spiritual immortality, is conditional. It depends entirely on how much of the real, how much virtue we have managed to absorb into our own being.
We only exist to the extent that we align ourselves with the one who truly exists. So if we choose the lie, we are in a very real sense choosing non-existence.
That is a heavy note to end on, but I think it's a necessary one. It forces you to look at your very next action, the next email you send, the next conversation you have, the next choice you make, and ask yourself, is this action building my reality, or is it dissolving it?
Are you feeding the mirage, or are you seeking the water?
That really is the question. We hope this deep dive has helped you distinguish the smoke from the fire.
And hopefully maybe it's given you the courage to start walking up that hill to see for yourself.